Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cast Dice, the podcast that explores the great big wild world of tabletop gaming. It has been said one or two times on this podcast, maybe every episode, that we are in the middle of a gaming renaissance. There are just literally too many good games out there these days that we can be spending our hobby time or our hobby dollars on. It often leads to a serious feeling of fear of missing out, as the kids say. They're just, there's too many things, and we sometimes hard to know what to play next. As part of that, this podcast sort of explores the games that my guests and I have been enjoying playing, industry events, different game systems that are coming up, and just tabletop gaming in general. Now, today we have a pretty special project that we are going to be talking about. If you've been listening recently, have heard me talking about games that I've enjoyed, like Warlords of Erewhon or 7TV, which are not necessarily miniature agnostic, but miniature neutral, which means they're not made by a specific miniature company selling a particular miniature line. And they are sort of open source sandbox games. And today, we're going to talk about a game that takes that idea and just runs with it, flies with it. The idea explodes everywhere, and it is really exciting. Now, you might know my guest as the gentleman behind one of the largest Warhammer 40,000 news updates, just article sites, Fate 212. You might know him as NAFCA. We call him Gary Krieger, and he is here today to talk about his new game system, which will be going to Kickstarter on July 12th. Gary, welcome to Cast Dice. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
I'm great, man. Oh, man. Let's talk, just before we get into the Kickstarter, I know a lot of people are big fans of your site and what you bring. Why don't you tell us just for a quick second, for those who don't know or those who do, how did you get started with Fate 212 and how that sort of led you to where you are now?
Well, that was kind of an accident, really.
It always is.
No, I was playing a lot of 40K, which is, normal.
Yep.
And I'd go into the game stores and I was playing a lot of games, and people would always be stopping me and asking me what I think of this. Should I be doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Should my list change? What do you think of this that's coming out? And there was a point in it where I was playing leagues that a small game would take me 3 to 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally I was reading some sites back then. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to put it on online, a blog,
mm-hmm.
and I'm going to answer these questions for them so I don't get interrupted all the time while I'm at a game store.
That's right. You want my opinion? Go read it. Yeah, exactly.
And I said, I will answer you. Let me finish my game.
Mm-hmm.
I'll answer you, and then I'll expand on it for you a little bit later. Just here, this is where you go to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so really the site was designed just for that, just so that I could answer questions more thoroughly for people that would be asking me questions while I play.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big Dark Eldar player, and that was right before the big release of the Dark Eldar. We're just coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of a news junkie on my own spare time.
Yep.
My wife's cured me of some of that, but not all of it.
Yep. Not making any connections to my own life there. Yep.
And since that's kind of what I did anyway, I always searched for. I was always used to getting a news story from one of the major news companies, and I'd always go to the local newspaper to get more details,
mm-hmm.
and get their articles and find out what they're talking about, so that you actually get more firsthand information. And that's just what I did on my own. And so it kind of just translated with the site. I started just talking about the Dark Eldar releases because I was excited.
Yeah.
And about, I think for the first 9 months of the site, it was me talking to myself and maybe one or two other people from the last time I was at the game store.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And then it just kind of went from there. And next thing you know, I don't know what happened, but within about, I guess, a year or two after that, it was 100,000 people on the site. I was
Yeah.
like, so yeah, someone told me that I wouldn't get more than 20,000 views in a month at one point. So there's
Yeah.
just there's not enough people for it. That doesn't
Surprise.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot more people than they think.
Exactly.
This is a big hobby. It's worldwide, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great hobby.
It is. It is. Well, we are very happy to have you on today to talk about not Warhammer 40,000, but a different
Yep.
game system. Now, as I said in sort of the preamble, it's an open source game. Maybe open source isn't the right word. A miniature neutral game. You can use almost any company for it. But before we get into that, we should probably talk about what the Genesys Project is. And I think the name is just a fantastic title for the game system that you lay out. As a lover of the Civilization video games, where you sort of build a society from scratch, and you sort of lay out the technology and the developments of those people as they go through, this sort of takes that idea and again runs with it to the nth degree. Why don't you give us the elevator pitch? What is the Genesys Project and how basically does it work? Because it's incredibly detailed, and I think you would probably be the best man to do it.
Well, it's a customizable war game where you get to create your faction. You do that by picking traits that give you that have a set of abilities with them, and that allows you to customize your faction to exactly what you want to play. Whether it be designing a faction for miniatures that you already have in your closet, to a theme that you want to play, to some miniatures from a company that you really want to get because they're just that good.
Right.
Or just if you want to customize to your heart's content or find that rule set that you like. It really allows the flexibility to create what you want.
Nice.
I mean, a lot of people have a play style that they fall into. Some people love charging just straightforward and just hitting you hard. With some people like to sit back. Some people like a mix of it. And this allows you to also really customize the faction for your play style.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
I mean, I've played a lot of games where, half the rules I'm not for my army. I don't care for really. It doesn't fit the way I play, so I'm not going to use them. Or I'm not going to use that part of it. Or it may have this really cool miniature that, man, I hate the rules for it.
Yeah, right? Well, that's part of the problem when you have a company that's making armies that are supposed to appeal to a lot of people, even within the specific confines of maybe a race or an army list within a big game like Warhammer 40,000, for example. They need to have a variety of units and rules to give people a more than, so you don't your armies aren't one dimensional. You need to give them a variety to sort of let them to cater their own forces, but they are still confined by the rules and the fluff of that game. What you're offering is to take those shackles off, as you say, and just let them run wild with it.
Right. Yeah, well, yeah. You can build. The idea behind the game is that pretty much you can fit and tailor that play style or that theme, and as you play, you can continue on that by creating your own heroes from gameplay.
Nice.
And those heroes will actually create a narrative as you keep playing your games. You can add new abilities to them. We've all had those games before where for some bizarre reason you were about to lose your mission or whatever it is, and one squad just pulled it off, or a model was how many sixes did you just roll?
Exactly.
Well, in this game, you get to make your heroes out of those guys.
That's amazing.
Your hero, then you create your heroes, and they become something part of your narrative. So not only do you get to create the actual rules within your faction, but you actually are creating your narrative from gameplay, which gives you a lot of it's so much fun. I see people that, and I kind of jumped here, but I mean, good friends of mine have these armies where almost every guy in their Imperial Guard armies is named.
Yes.
And I wanted to be able to take a game that could not just cater to those people, but get them excited about, their individual models and their exploits and
Yeah.
and so on.
That's why most of us get into gaming in the first place. That being able to play out those cinematic narratives on the tabletop that that we love in maybe movies or comic books or books that we read, right? And this is the opportunity to do that.
It is, and with the games, there are games out there that allow you to level up and purchase new gear and stuff like that as you play. But a lot of them, you play the game and it's done, and it kind of resets you back.
Yes.
And so the point here is literally the Genesys Project. There's 3 ages of gameplay in it.
Mm-hmm.
The first age is kind of the fantasy, medieval, Renaissance. Second age is modern to near future, and the third age is the far distant future. But you can create a faction during any of those ages.
Mm-hmm.
Create one in the first and actually play through, advancing and progress through all the way through the different ages to create this very dynamic, long, history of your faction.
That's awesome.
So, and all through gameplay, it was important that your primary missions that you have awards to them,
mm-hmm.
And that you're able to be flexible with that, and so you can actually you get within your missions there, get your correct forces ready to actually play that mission, get that mission, gain an award from that mission, and either create a new class of guys within your faction, or maybe you covered an artifact, or really carry that narrative.
That is fantastic, because so many of these games sort of fit a particular genre, but by spacing it out over 3 ages, as you say, you're able to, really just cater for almost any time period that one can imagine. But as you say, you're able to sort of guide the evolution of a species almost throughout that entire time period, which is something I have literally never seen in a game before.
Yeah, and even though you say it's taken a long time to actually work through it.
Absolutely.
The game's been in development for about 6 years now, and we had an open beta that lasted a little bit over a year, had about 900 participants in it, and that was worldwide. We had people from everywhere. It was interesting, and then we had, and that's been basically closed for about a year now. And that gave us gave us a lot of feedback, gave us a lot of ideas on where people were going with their factions. And a lot of questions are, hey, can the game do this, or will it do this? And, we really believe, I really believe that there's not a lot of miniature lines out there that you can't create something within the Genesys Project for.
I actually went through my shelf of books this morning and went through my cases and and I came to that very conclusion. I went through game by game by game by game, by company by company by company, and literally every single model I own can easily be placed in this universe, so to speak. And it's amazingly encompassing.
Well, that's always good to hear. But yeah, we've looked at a lot of, over the last 6 years, we've looked at a lot of miniature lines from different companies, a lot of games that don't have a lot of miniature companies that don't have games, and ones that do have miniatures and back and forth, and really looking at them saying, can this be made? So I think we do. I think the game will really encompass that, but I think it'll do more than that. I think there's actually more depth to it than that. I think that just to look at, for instance, lycanthropy, for instance, it's not just wolves, but there's the other transformations from the different types of animals that are involved, whether you got it from a curse, from being hereditary, or
science.
So there's all sorts of different options and depth within the game that lets you really customize exactly how you're building your guys all the way through the ages. And the first age, there's you can really create monsters.
Oh yeah.
You can create your classical monsters. You can create ones of your own bidding. The second age, you start jumping into vehicle creation rules. So you're creating your own vehicles. designing your own tanks. And the same thing goes for the third age, where you're getting into your power armor. You get to customize how your power armor with your backup systems, and whether you've got stims to help rejuvenate you as you take wounds, or if you're into genetics, or there's just so many different directions you can go.
Yeah. But
So
a lot of what people, I guess, would assume is, I mean, we as human beings often, when we envision going into the past and going into the future, envision sort of humanoid races, human-esque races. Even if you're going back through fantasy, I mean, if we look at dwarves, we look at elves, orcs, all of those sort of fall under the humanoid umbrella. But what you've provided in this game, in addition to giving people a variety of time periods to put their forces into, you've actually gone much deeper than that by breaking it into lots of different factions. When you say a faction, you're just talking about different types of humanoids. You're getting way deeper than that, and I think let's talk about that, because that's a big part of this game.
Okay. It is. What in the game, there are 5 different domains of life.
Mm-hmm.
Those domains are humanoids,
Mm-hmm.
and humanoids encompass pretty much everything you just said.
Yep.
So giants, dwarves, elves. There's a large variety of what humanoids can be. And then there's the Fae. The Fae are outside of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So they could be your angels, demons, elemental type creatures, or so. And then you have your reptilia, which are all the reptile type species, whether it's draconics, or we have tuatarans and saurians and different lineages within that. Then there are the beasts, which incorporate all the several different animal kingdoms that you can build within, whether you're building monsters, or you're building more human-like beasts that just have those more feral abilities and stuff. Then we have the insects, and the insects are there are lots of classifications of insects that we have, but there's also tied into that, we have the cordyceps fungi also mixed into the insects, because as they can be a controlling aspect of the insects as well. And so then after the insects, you're able to create a faction. You have the 5 domains, and you start within one of the 5. But you also have the ability to cross over and get abilities from other domains.
Oh, nice.
And the best example of that is a spellcaster, for instance. Spells and powers are really outside of they come from outside of reality, and those are in the Fey domain. But through traits and through the traits and abilities that you choose, you're able to cross over and grab and access some of those.
Nice.
And there is also the it's like the door of Pandora, right? We call it forbidden lore. And forbidden lore basically allows you to grab a single trait from almost anywhere in the game, and basically opens it up for the rest of your faction. Opens up a specific branch of traits. So you could technically have a humanoid faction, for instance, take forbidden lore and jump into the Fae with it, and grab a trait out of the death from death. And now a lot of your faction might become undead.
Oh, nice.
Or they might become, or you might go into destruction or corruption. There's different areas to go into, or you might become much more feral. You might start taking things out of the beast domain. So there's different directions that you can go and cross and cross over in the domains to really customize even further.
Definitely. Well, I'm just looking through some of the rules at the moment, and just talking about. This as soon as you start talking about evolutionary branches, and before you start talking about starting characteristics, you really are opening up a system that will allow you to fit what you are hoping to build, and just the sheer number of traits that you have included in just the basic rules that I've seen are astonishing. The detail here is extraordinary, and I don't know how else to dive in without taking a little from just dipping my toe in the water as to falling into a very deep ocean. It looks sensational. How did you come up with all of this? Because as you say, it takes time, but this is incredibly detailed and well thought out.
So what we did is we created a way to create your species that was really meant to be something that you could do quickly as far as the mechanics go. And so what you do is you have a starting set of characteristics, and with that, say for humanoids, for instance, you're selecting 4 to 8 different traits for your species that affect your army, your whole army. And that concept by itself is pretty simple, so it can be done with a relatively ease of doing it. Now, once we had that in place, it was, okay, well, where are these traits? And well, they're divided up into different evolutionary branches.
That's right.
And what that does is it allows you to kind of pick your traits from these branches and kind of branch outwardly from them. So you have your primary traits and your secondary traits. Well, in order to get to the secondary traits, you have to have a primary trait.
Nice.
And so it kind of branches you outwards and kind of directs the way that you're building your faction. That's right. And later on your classes, because you have individual classes too that help really expand what your individual guys will be what they'll be like. Your unit classes are groups of soldiers or guys that have different skills above and beyond what the rest of your faction does. Nice. And so you create a number of these classes, and that process is done on top of the species. So you're selecting additional traits, which add additional points to those classes. So, and that's in the gist of it. That's pretty much how the system for it. Which makes it pretty, and then it's just a matter of now designing what you want, what you want to play.
Exactly. Well, the way everything is set out, it's set out in charts with the point values associated with everything. And what I really like about that, it's very clear. The process is clear as you go through how to follow it, and everything is pointed so that you know exactly. So each of these ideas are incorporated in so that you have a value that actually represents that on the tabletop. So despite this incredibly variable system where you sort of evolve as you go, you're able to still have fair and fun games on the tabletop.
Right. And that's what it comes down to. I mean, it's not just a faction creation game. It's about playing the games and evolving the games so that your missions give you awards, and you're playing the group of people that you play in almost becomes like its own world with its own story, because the Reptilia player that I'm playing all of a sudden has lots of flyers, and I'm okay. Well, that's not cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So I got to figure out. So you adapt to each other almost like you would in evolution, adapting to each other. Yeah. And trying and surviving. So it's a ton of fun to have a group of guys and be playing over a period of over a year or 2 years. And the in-house play testers are quite interesting, trying to always stay on top of each other.
Yes. Well, it's also great because if someone wants to join in the fun, or if you want to play a pickup game of this using one of your existing armies that you may have from another game system, the point values are laid out in such a way that you can easily then figure out how to sort of level out with everyone else at the same time, even if you don't go through that process.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is that when you're playing, and even if a group of guys have been playing for a couple months, if they've been playing for a couple months, a new person can jump in and even create a faction that's just starting, and the point values will balance that out in the end. They'll be fielding a lot less guys. They'll be fielding So it's really balanced out, and we've had new people come in and out of the playtesting circles over the last several years, and they just jump right in.
Yeah.
We've not had the issues of that, of the guys that are much further along being all more powerful than the new guys.
That's saying something, because that, again, is something that you often don't see in other game systems. It is very hard to accomplish that, but through all the trees of charts that interconnect and how you go from one to the next, that really does, it really is new player friendly in a really spectacular way that, for such a narrative-driven game, if you're playing it that way, is very hard to achieve, and you never see. So, yeah, hats off to you, man, because as I was reading this, I was thinking, this is something special. That is something you just don't get that often. For an opportunity for new players to, come in mid, quote-unquote, campaign and to be on an equal level is truly rare.
Yeah, and it's important, because I think that's how you keep the campaigns going, because some people are going to drop out for a little while. Some people are going to come back in. Life happens.
Exactly.
We're not all hobby based. I wish that's all we had to do, right?
Yeah, right.
But, and it's one of those things that the new person can come in. The game system itself is easy to learn. It's one core set of rules for all three ages. And really jump in where they want to play. And if a store is running a massive campaign, and there's a group in there's people playing the first, second, and third, they can kind of jump in where they want, and really have a lot of fun with it. And the same thing goes for models too. I mean, someone's starting out in a game where you have to start buying models. Okay, well, now I've only got 500 points. I've only got this many points of models for this game. But for the Genesys Project, you really, models already in your closet can come out and join into the game right away.
And I do have a lot of models in my closet, so that is great news for me. Well, as you say, this isn't just a faction building game. Clearly that's what you need to do before you get onto the tabletop. But let's talk about how the game plays itself. When you are playing this game with other people, what does it look like? Being so broad a scope for narrative, talk to us a little bit about some of your games so we get a feel.
Well, first you decide on a point value when you come to the table, because the point values in this game scale the game upwards.
Nice.
And what I mean by that is that you have a discipline characteristic in the game. And the characteristics generally range from 1 to 6. Generally, they do go above. And so if you've got a 3 discipline, for instance, and you're playing a 500-point skirmish game, your squad size will be for a beginning class will be 1 to 3 guys. It's a small game. That's how big your squad will be.
Nice.
If you increase that discipline to 4, then you can have up to 4 guys. Now, if you play, say, 1,000-point game, that squad size will double. So you could your squad might be 2 to 8 guys for that class, and then your leaders might be able to now join the game because they were excluded from a small game. And so you can only have, say, 1 leader in that larger game until you play a much bigger game.
Gotcha.
So it's incremental on the size of game that you play, on what class levels are able to come into the game, and how many of them.
Right.
And so that means your very big games might be able to bring in very unique, very powerful miniatures.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but that's what the scale of the game, how it scales upwards. And then the next thing that you're doing once you decide your point value is you are first of all, you're handing your army, your faction, to the other opponent, so they have a concept of what the heck you can bring.
Right? Exactly.
So that's one of the things that you do when you get to the game board. Hey, this is my faction. These are, so they can see what you have. You're deciding the point value. You roll up your primary missions. And there's a bunch of them. Each person that's at the table, both you and your opponent, have your own primary mission.
Nice.
That you're there to accomplish.
Yeah.
My job might be to massacre the heck out of you. Their job might be to get an objective.
Yes.
And each of those awards, if they fulfill them, will actually give them an award.
Yeah.
Mine award would be different because I'm doing a massacre. Yours would be different because you're doing an objective mission.
Mm-hmm.
So once that's done, now you sit down. You've set the table up. You've gotten your primary mission. Now you're sitting down there and creating your list up to the point value, so that I know what you are. So basically, the terrain's not going to mess with your game. Your opponent, you know what he can bring, so you're going to make sure that you have something to deal with him. So you're not going to ever get locked into this idea where I'm playing one army list for every game I play.
Nice.
So it's flexible as far as, when you go if you're going into a mission and your mission is to recover an artifact, well, you're not going to build a whole army that's going to sit back and wait. You've got to go get it.
Exactly, right?
And so that this allows you to customize that, and to, when you're playing, send in the forces that you think would be best to deal with the situation at hand.
Nice.
And that's kind of how the game is set up.
Well, that's
gameplay.
Hold on. Before we get into proper gameplay, that's really exciting because I think you've really incorporated a few really narrative little nuances, little flourishes that a lot of game systems don't have, that really helps sell the narrative. For example, by telling your opponent the aspects of your domain, all of the characteristics, it makes sense that inhabitants of the same world, so to speak, know of the guys over the ridge, or people in the other continent, or in their solar system, depending on which age you're playing in. And it makes sense that they would know, sort of where evolutionarily those people are. Unless you wanted to do something completely wild and say, oh, look, somebody's landed from another planet, or a dimension door's open. We don't know who these people are. And I'm sure you could work that into your games. So that's really great. But the other thing is... sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, even then, even if if a portal did open up, it's the scouts that are first telling you what the heck's coming through.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then you're not going to send your little guys out there to kind of pester them to, once you know what's coming through. If they're sending massive giant demons through, you've got to be able to deal. You're going to send what you think can deal with that.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
So that's the idea behind that. So.
Yeah. Well, then when you marry that with the variable mission system where each person has their own objectives, I mean, oftentimes in miniature war games, you play a mission where it is both players are trying to achieve the same thing. And though that happens in many conflicts, it is more often the case that forces on the tabletop would be more accurately represented if each side had its own objectives that they were trying to achieve. And the fact that you have that and you've built that in really does help create a really spectacular narrative on the tabletop.
Well, let me expand upon that. And you can, when you're starting to play the game, there is a secondary mission that comes into play, and it's shared between both your opponent and you. Nice. But that is not even rolled for until the end of the second round of gameplay.
Oh, cool. So you don't know what's happened, what that objective is until you're thick and fast, right? In the
so
thick
the
of
secondary objective comes in, and the secondary objective is kind of that wild card. It's changing battle conditions. It's okay, and it changes the gameplay dynamically when I watch these guys play on the table, these play testers especially, because they're trying to maximize out what their progression points is, and the way you get, there's something called progression points in the game, and you get a progression point, a point value. The most progression that you can get in a game equals the point value that you're playing.
Nice.
So if I'm playing 1,000-point game, it's possible for me to get 1,000 points out of the game for my progression to advance me towards the next stage. And so those 1,000 points of progression, where they come from in the game is, you have a primary mission, your opponent has a primary mission, and then there's a shared secondary mission. You get 50% of your total progression if you succeed with your primary mission.
Nice.
So if you have a 1,000-point game, that would give you 500 progression points. Now, if you stop your opponent from fulfilling his primary mission, you get 25%, and you get 25% from the secondary mission if you beat your opponent from it.
Oh, that's a nice breakdown. Nice, yeah.
So if you're playing a 2,000-point game, you have 2,000 points that you can possibly get, and then again, your primary mission is always your main focus of the game, because that gets you your primary mission game award, which might be a new trait, a new species trait, maybe build a new class, or give you some options to build a hero, those types of things. But your progression points are gained from the point value that you're playing. So if you're playing a lot of small games, they're fast, they're just much smaller, which is fine. But it also gives people a chance to really make sure that they are progressing. There's not too many games where someone actually blows somebody out at a full 100% of the progression points.
Yeah, and that's important because getting completely blown out can often lead to what we call the feel-badsies in the gaming world.
Well, the way the game works, it's interesting because if my mission and your mission, they couldn't be the exact same thing, right? But oftentimes you're doing two different things. My mission might be to survive.
That's right.
My mission might be to survive with certain models or a certain percentage of my force left. Your mission might be to, get in or take my territory, take my deployment zones.
Right.
And that's going to throw us into conflict. But at the same time, if I'm getting close to not surviving, my primary job is to survive.
That's
so
right.
I'm going to be not blocking him.
That's
if
right.
if I can get away with it. Or it might be that both people have succeeded at their primary mission and that they're really pushing hard to either take it away from the other person or lock in that secondary mission, which you guys are both competing for because it's just one secondary mission.
Nice. Now, that was my next question. Are the primary missions and secondary missions, clearly the secondary mission, since it's shared, is not a secret, but are the primary missions sort of secret? Do people know what each other are trying to achieve, or is that something that is intentionally part of the game that you are trying to block your opponent and achieve yours at the same time?
You both roll each other's in front of each other.
Nice. Okay.
There is a secret objective mission, which because when you set the board up, there are possible objective markers on the board that may or may not come into play. But the secret missions mean that those are rolled not at the beginning of the game, but they're rolled as the game starts progressing. So some of those things can change.
Nice.
But it puts a balancing factor in there too, so that yes, I can go out there and I can stop my opponent. They're trying to do this, but again, your primary mission, 50% of your progression all comes from your primary mission plus your mission awards. So everyone's really focused on what they're doing. The type of player that always gets lost on the mission because I'm killing models.
Yep. Never done that myself. Don't know what you're talking about.
Well, the primary missions, because there's so much focus on it, it really does help focus some of those guys. And myself too, because sometimes I'm just going, oh, I've been wanting to get rid of that guy.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that comes into play. But and knowing that the primary missions are there and rolling for the secondary mission in the after the second round really helps refocus you kind of on what you're doing after those initial salvos or movements. Nice. So the purpose was kind of to help players remember kind of what they're doing, as well as throw a kink into the plan.
Exactly.
With the secondary mission.
Well, I guess that brings me to my next question. When you are playing these games, and I know I sort of interrupted your flow when you were talking about how to play the game.
Yes.
When you have your forces, when you have your tabletop, when you have your forces to put on the tabletop, I guess my next question is, what size tabletop? And now you're talking about the scaling of the game, so clearly that might change depending on how big a force you're playing. But what sort of tabletop size do you recommend per point value?
4x4.
Excellent.
For most games. We kind of wanted to keep it at 4x4 for a majority of them. simply because it's so much easier to have.
Yes, right?
um, there's an odd skew to ranges as well. Sometimes when you have a 4x6 or 4x8.
Yes.
For very big games, you might need that, and so for larger games over 2,500 points, I believe, or it might be 3,000. The game can be changed to a 4x6 board.
Okay.
But we have played those big games on the 4x4s, and they've worked, and they're just fun.
Nice. Very nice. And how much time would a game play out? Again, I understand that they're scaling, but ballpark,
Correct.
What are we talking?
We play 1,000-point games in about an hour and a half.
Nice.
That includes setting the board up. We have a process for setting the board up.
Oh, good. Yep. Do tell.
Well, so you get to the board. The board is divided into 3 sections. You have your deployment area. He has his deployment area, and then there's the area of conflict. Across the board, that divides the board into 3 equal sections. All right. So basically, you are rolling for the amount of terrain that goes into each of those sections.
Oh, okay.
Now, if you have a lot of terrain on your side of the board, there's a rule stipulation about not allowing you to have elevated defensive positions. So you can't set the tower up unless you have only 1 to 2 pieces of terrain in your zone.
Okay.
And if you do only have 1 to 2, then you can put them in there, and you've got a nice defensible spot. So that it's a balancing factor for terrain setup. Within your deployment zone, there are, and without showing you the actual layout, it's a little bit harder to describe, but there are 6 deployment zones within your area.
Okay.
For each player. It starts from the left side of the board, your left side of the board.
Okay.
And your opponent's on the left. And the zones are numbered 1 through 3 going across. And then another row that finishes up the deployment area of 4 through 6. And they're labeled that way because you get to choose 3 of those zones to deploy into.
Oh, nice.
And so what you do when you're done is, and you deploy 2 squads at a time. And so you get to see what each other are doing and kind of react to each other. And some of that might involve some infiltration and sentries fighting it out or counter moving during all of this. But once you're done, you add up the total of your deployment zones of the 3 zones that you have. And the person with the lowest score there has initiative for the first game round.
Nice.
And so you can see what a person's doing. And if they're deploying the closest to you, they're choosing zone 6. They're obviously not going to go first.
Right.
So you can, and that kind of makes it it's a fun game setup. Not just, hey, let's just throw this stuff here and here,
Well, it's almost the game within the game. That whole, how am I going to deploy to help, using my forces to help achieve what I need to achieve. How do I set that up and possibly, give away the initiative to the other player if that best suits my own needs?
Correct. Yeah, and there's scout. I love scouts. So when I'm playing, I'm trying to use my scouts. Although I think everyone's been killing my scouts as I do it in the game lately, because it's a during deployment move into the area of conflict. And if I get within so many inches of one of his squads, it allows me to, as a scout, note his location and lower my overall deployment initiative by 1. So I have a better chance of going first.
There you go. Yeah.
So there's little things in there that are fun to do, but they can also get killed doing it. So
nice.
Well, but anyway, so that's deployment, and that's how we set the board up. And we talked about missions, and then there's some weather effects also that are in there as well. So
nice. And then the giant bell rings, and somebody else get ready to rumble, and the game begins.
What we have, the game is technically 6 rounds. It's 6 game rounds. And the person with the initiative starts first. and you have a certain number of activations that you can do during your player turn.
Okay.
And then once you're done with that, then your opponent goes. It's alternating player turns until every unit has moved, or every squad has moved.
Got it.
And you can move a number of squads equal to the highest command characteristic that you have on the field.
Okay.
So if I've got a good command of 5, and my opponent kills him, now I got to go. Oh, what do I have next?
Mm-hmm.
So there is a little bit of that, and the game goes 6 rounds, all the way through. Oh, and whoever finishes their activations first has initiative for the next round.
Ah, nice.
And you can challenge that and try and take it from the person, which is a roll against each other, and there's some modifiers to it. But it's not the easiest thing to be taking someone's initiative away from them. But you can do it. But that allows for a certain flow of gameplay instead of someone holding all their units back. It's some people race to the end to try and get initiative. Some people don't, but you're not going to get double back player turns, for instance, unless you're able to really challenge the initiative well. But the game goes for 6 game rounds to accomplish your mission.
Yep.
And then there's something called the end game. The end
nice.
game is the end game can push the game into round 7, round 8, 9, and 10.
Oh, wow.
Now, the way you do that is it's really simple. If you're going into game round 7, you drop a dice, you add your command value to it. If it equaled or beat that 7 for the game round, the game goes another round.
Nice.
So if I'm really close to getting my objective, but I just need that one more round, I mean, how many times does that happen?
Oh, yeah.
I can go for it, and I can try and get it. Now, my opponent knows that, and so he may try and kill my leader who has the high command so that I'm not able to push it into the next round. So there's a little bit of gameplay and back and forth into that.
Yeah. Well, you have that almost game within the game in the pre-game setup, and then of course to have that, because it's a variable game length at the end, or modified because you can try and contest it. You almost have that game within a game to see if the game ends, which, as you say,
Correct.
If you're both trying to achieve an objective, I think that will make for a really rich and interesting tactical experience for the end of the game.
And it adds new tactics where, trying to knock out a person's command and control the game is a very valuable tactic. Because, high command allows you to activate that many different units during squads during my player turn.
That's right.
And it'll allow me, if I need that extra round or so to try and pull off the objective.
Yeah, that's really cool, because in a lot of games, leaders are just sometimes someone who carries a pretty sword and runs around in the front, but doesn't actually have a giant impact on the tabletop in an actual leadership capacity. It's fantastic to see that not only does that have an impact on the activations of your forces, but also it becomes a very important part of that end game mini game, so to speak.
Right. And, there's a lot of games that I've played where it's the last round. I have the last activation. I wouldn't normally run these 6 inches out here to jump on the objective,
right?
Because I'd get shot up and be dead. But because I'm the last person activating, I don't care.
Exactly.
And game's over. Here, your opponent goes, no, I'm not having that.
Exactly. Yeah, you can do that, but there's a good chance there's going to be another turn, and then I'm going to hose you off that objective.
And then you're done, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And then I win the game. Yeah, exactly.
So we've tried to make sure that the game is very interactive between both players on the field, not only in the command like we were just talking about, but also in the activations. With every time that you activate, your opponent can do a reactionary activation as well. And basically interrupt gameplay. Now, their characteristics and stuff like that are at a -1, so they have a harder time pulling things off. But they can react to what you're doing. If my guys are standing out in the open, they can react and try and get that base movement out of my models to jump back into cover or something to save their butts. So there is a back and forth that can occur. Now, you would think those would happen a lot, but they don't happen as much as I thought originally they would. But they do occur, and they do save your butt.
Well, again, you're adding. I mean, there is there. This isn't just a simple. Okay, this you go, I go, you go, I go, and then we're done.
Correct.
There's a lot of tactics and a lot of, what is my opponent going to do? What am I going to do? How am I going to counter that? And that just makes for a rich gaming experience.
Right. And the fact that if I do decide to react, okay, I'm not going to be at my full capacity because I'm reacting to you. So you're not going your range skill is at a -1. So if I'm going to shoot at you before you're charging into me, I'm going to be at that -1 to hit you. So or that -1 for shooting range, is that going to be enough? Because as soon as he hits me, I've already used up my action for the round, so I'm not going to be able to fight back again.
True.
So that was the other thing. I know we didn't talk about that, but when you do activate a squad, they get a movement and an action, basically, is what it breaks down to.
Nice.
And so if you use your action, you're not going to be, I get to shoot at you, and then I get to pull out all my melee weapons and fight you at full capacity type game.
Ooh, and that does not feel good to be on the receiving end of.
Yeah, and so you're making that conscious decision whether or not to melee fight or not fight in melee, to shoot or to not shoot or to get out of the way, or it's a lot more choices on the field, I think.
Yeah, and again, those choices are tactically what make games interesting. So nice.
Yep, and for combat, I mean, since we were talking about combat,
yes.
The combat situation is one of those things in the game that came on much later.
Okay.
We have the way the game works right now is you have your characteristics, and you're trying to hit target numbers to hit a person,
right,
or to when you're swinging. So if you've got a range skill of say 3 and the target has a range target number of 7, you need a 4+ to hit them.
Right.
And that makes it very simple as far as hitting them. What the combat situation does is throws modifiers into that combat.
Okay. And
what that entails is I activate a combat. Say it's a melee combat. You and me are both going to add up each other's combat enhancements, and that might be for outnumbering. It might be for coordinated attacks. It might be for a large number of things. Maybe I've got really big strength. Maybe I'll get these enhancements, and these add up to my combat situation total. So I might have a +3, and you may not have a whole lot there. You have a +1. That would give me a combat advantage of 2. So I would add a 2 to my dice rolls in that combat.
Okay.
Only one side comes away with the advantage in there. And it makes the combat, it's very fast to come up with, and it makes the game dynamic as far as you don't get stuck in a combat that isn't ever going to end.
Right. But we've all seen those combats of games that literally last the entire game and just go, this isn't ever going to properly resolve. So having a good game system that would allow those combats to play out quickly and get on with the game, it's pretty good. Yeah,
there's only one there's the only dice rolls that are done in combat are to hit and to save. That's it. So there are basically two dice rolled. If you got your combat situation, the attacker rolls his dice to hit, and the person getting hit makes any saves that they have to make.
Nice.
So combat can be resolved, pretty quickly. And the combat situation itself really changed the dynamics of the game once we put it in. It just changed. We had a lot of modifiers before, but it put all the modifiers in the one nice little package to determine who really has the advantage over the other person. So you're comparing notes to each other. So you're not adding dice to your dice, and I'm adding to mine at the same time. So we're not adding all these odd things together to see what I can do and what I can't do. The combat situation makes it one number, and one side gets the bonus or not.
Exactly.
So
I really liked how the way the characteristics for this game lay out, where you have your ability to use a ranged weapon, for example, and have your characteristic for combat, for example, is sort of the number you need to roll to hit someone. But then you add that with the defense characteristic of your particular model to sort of factor in if someone's shooting or when someone's shooting at you, if I read the rules correctly, which means that if you are if you're a bad shot, you may not be particularly, aware of how guns work. And so that means that, when people are shooting at you, you may not be, good at hiding. Whereas if you're a sniper, or someone who's very aware of how firearms work and someone's shooting at you, you have a better idea of how to defend yourself from that fire. And I thought that was a very neat dynamic.
Right. Yeah. In order those target numbers in there are created by, for instance, for in melee combat, you're adding two characteristics together to come up with that number.
Right.
And that does add that. And the same thing with range, but it's tied into your movement. And movement bonuses that you get in game are all handled in the combat situation.
Okay.
So if you're moving really fast, for instance, or you're in really good cover, the combat situation grants you those enhancements to the combat to see whether or not you've got the advantage. But yeah, the trait system itself or the characteristic system itself was a long time in the works. I think the first year or so, they varied a little bit. On exactly how they worked, but once it was locked in, it really plays out well, because with those different characteristics, you can even attack different characteristics in it. You can attack somebody's normally when you're attacking somebody, they have a toughness that they're adding to their die roll to save against the hit, right?
Yes.
So that's how you would normally attack somebody physically. But if you attack somebody mentally, you're attacking their willpower.
Oh, of course.
So they're saving with their willpower instead of their toughness.
Yeah. Well, having read through clearly, as you say, I imagine there was a couple of iterations of this, because it seems to be an incredibly well-developed system, especially for a version, quote unquote, one rule set that's about to go to Kickstarter. I mean, you look at this system and it looks like a game system that is well-developed, well-established, and has been run through the mill countless times. It has that feeling. And I mean, just the way that you're describing it as well, I think gives us and the listeners an idea of just how much thought you've put into this. So I'd imagine that it has changed a lot over the years.
It has. It has. And there were some very embarrassing moments in it during it.
Yes, I'm sure those happened.
I remember some very embarrassing moments with the playtest, with the in-house guys coming in, and my jaws just hits the floor on what they came up with and what they were doing to the table.
Yeah. The fastest way to break a game system is to hand it to gamers and let them do stuff with it, because we as a demographic do love to break game systems, break army lists, you name it, we break it. And so the fact that you've had such an open beta for such a long time, I think speaks volumes about how you've been able to develop this game system.
Yeah, the open beta was that's when you're getting feedback from all over the world. It was quite interesting, some of the feedbacks, and we took every single bit of it into consideration, if not making changes and adjustments to them. Because even if I didn't like what I read, I still sat there and go, okay, put it away for a few minutes. Let's come back to it and see what they're saying and where it came from. Yeah. And see what's going on with it. And that was kind of the approach I took with it, which is why the open beta was closed for a year. And pretty much all the guys that were involved were starting to get a little antsy with me, because they hadn't heard anything for 8-9 months. Right. Because I was still going through all this feedback, and it was some late nights and some long in-house playtester sessions where we're just sitting there figuring out the details. So,
well, as you said, it's better to have those those embarrassing moments during playtesting than after the game comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting that when I first decided to actually go forward with the game and start actually, let's put these on paper and let's make the rules.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother thing to put it in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a whole nother thing to go to open beta and see what reactions you get.
Yeah.
And even then, this is the type of game that I literally could work on this game for the rest of my life.
Having seen what you've put out already, I can believe it, and I'm sure it would just add even more depth.
So, and I think the whole thing is there's a point where the game really is hitting the point where all we're doing now is adding things that, okay, these are cool.
Yeah.
But we don't need to get into those right now. Let's get the core game out.
Yep.
And let's get people playing.
Exactly.
And let's see what they're making. On my site, I ran several create a faction contests with some of the beta rules. And I got in 50, 60 different factions that people were creating. Not one of them was the same.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it was interesting. Even people that sit together, and I've had some testers sit down and create the same faction together because they wanted to play kind of the same faction, just different groups of it. So they made their classes a little bit differently. But I gave 3 months later, their factions had pulled apart quite a bit as they were changing just to their play style and the way they saw it happening.
I think that speaks volumes of the depth of the game and where the variability that it allows. And as we've been saying the whole time along, I think the word of the episode is evolution, and how the game evolves with you as a player as you play, which is pretty awesome. Well, okay, you want to get the base game out in front of people, and I know that you've done that with the beta and with the open testing and live testing, but now we're going to the great big wild world in Kickstarter in just a couple weeks. So let's talk about what is going to be involved with the Kickstarter campaign. What are people going to be able to get? Because as you say, this is a miniature neutral game. Tons of companies are going to be, have their models in the books, but this game system is not going to be married to any of them particularly.
No, that is correct. Now, when it came to launching the game, I actually had to. I haven't launched a game before, and I know that, and I know that there's so many pitfalls that can be done out there. So in comes Dave, Dave Taylor, if you don't know who he is, and Dave and I. And I clearly, if he says that this is the way it needs to be, that's the way it is.
Yeah, the man knows,
because he is the expert, and I know that, and I'm not going and I didn't want to hit the pitfalls that a lot of games can hit. And I wanted to make sure that this game was successful, and I think that bringing in Dave in was an important aspect of that, because he does know what's going on, not only in launching the Kickstarter, but in actually getting the books to everybody. The Kickstarter is going to be 2 books. It's going to be the Genesys Project, the core rules, which is the core rules that will involve. It'll be good for all the ages of the gameplay. It will have several pre-made factions in it, so that you can get the core rules and play the game.
Nice.
And then we will have the birth of Genesys, the first age. And that is an all-encompassing book of all 5 domains, with the powers and the armory. I know the promotional set that you do have does not have the armory or any of the powers in it, and doesn't have that list in there. But that's going to be all part of the first age. There's also going to be a monster creation section as well to customize and create monsters. And that will be part of it. So we're going to be launching the books will be part of what people can get, the pledges. They'll be able to get digital copies as well. And that will be our primary focus. There will be a couple greater awards that will allow somebody to get an early version of the rule set or of part of it to actually create a faction, and so that people that made those pledges will actually have that. Those will be our pre-made factions in the core rules.
Oh, that's awesome! Nice.
And I'm still talking to a company which I won't mention quite yet,
Mm-hmm.
but they may even be putting out a putting out a monster miniature created by our monster creation rules.
Cool.
And that will, and the monster would be created through a pledge level, and then the monster would be created and available to everybody else later on. But obviously, whoever made it would get. I'm sending them the miniature.
Yes. Well, yeah. There you go. Oh, that's cool. I love how you're including factions, pre-made factions that are player-made as part of the base game, so people can get. I mean, it's one thing to have this put in front of you, which is what I had when I looked at the base rules and went, wow, the possibilities are endless. But then it's another thing to look at some pre-made factions to get an idea of exactly how you can combine them, and then look at that open menu again and say, okay, now that I've seen how some other people do it, this is how I'm going to do it. And that's really clever. I think that's a really great addition to the books when they come out on release.
And we're going to and those are going to be made by players. We already have 2 of them already made, but those were made by players during early design, and so they were part of the creative faction contest. And so those 2 factions that won will also be included as well. And then there'll be ones from the Kickstarter launch.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So and that's the purpose too. I mean, it's taken a great deal of input from people everywhere, and it'd be great to have your name in it.
Exactly, right? Who doesn't want their name in a game book? I do.
So we've done, I do too. But we've done all of that, and I think that it's going to be a lot of fun to sit down with the people at the conclusion of the Kickstarter, get them the domain that they want to be a part of, and create a faction out of it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think it is really important to go back and touch on one thing that you mentioned a minute ago, and that's the inclusion of Dave Taylor in this project. Now, if you are not familiar with Dave, he is a longtime friend of mine / the show. Dave and I, in fact, were roommates at one point. And he was the former editor of White Dwarf for Australia for a long time. He's been a part of the greater gaming community for an eternity, it feels like. And recently, last year, he had a successful Kickstarter for his book, Armies, Legions, and Hordes, which I'm looking at on my shelf right now, which is just an incredible resource for gaming. Now, if you want to hear him talk about his experiences with that Kickstarter and helping people with other Kickstarters, if you go back to Cast Dice episode 50, you can listen to him talk about that. Now, he is sort of a freelance gaming a guru. I don't know the word. A fixer, a handyman. But he goes through and helps people who have done the hard work, like Gary in this case, and helps them with the aspects that, as Gary said, he hasn't tackled before, like a successful Kickstarter. Because it's one thing to sort of read about the pitfalls. It's another thing to actually talk to someone and to work with someone to make sure that, who's been through that process again and again and again, to make sure that what you're promising on your Kickstarter will be achieved. So, yeah.
And that was important. And that's important. I mean, there's so many unknowns as far as,
Right.
So, I mean, from as easy as who do I use for publishing?
Mm-hmm.
Or who do I use, and how does all this work? And Dave knows the ins and outs of that. And he also ran another recent successful Kickstarter too on Terrain Essentials.
That's right. With Mel.
With Mel, yeah. And, he did, Dave knows his stuff, and he's worked with, Cool Minis or Not. He's worked with he's worked with a ton of guys.
He has.
And so he knows the industry. And so when it comes to a lot of that, I have suggestions and things that I see, and Dave
Mm-hmm.
says that either works or that does not work.
Yeah, exactly.
And we don't do what he does not say does not work, because
Mm-hmm.
he is the mastermind behind that stuff, and he
Yeah.
is brilliant when it comes to that. So I have nothing but good things to say about Dave and his family. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in traps when you are setting up your own Kickstarter. And of course, I say this never having done my own, but having followed and backed many, it's sometimes hard to know what you can promise and what you can deliver on. And again, as you say, the behind the scenes of distribution and
yep.
production, it's a huge process. And to be able to do that with someone who knows what they're doing, not to say that you don't, but who's been through the process several times, really does lend a credibility to the project. That, it sounds like you've gone through from creation through beta, up through even planning the Kickstarter. You have gone through systematically throughout this process to ensure that you are creating a fantastic game system. So great stuff, Gary.
Well, thank you. I want to see it. I want to see it be successful at launch. And I just knew. I knew that I can't do it all.
Right.
I can't. And Dave is that person. We meet right now. We're meeting once a week, and I think that's about to pick up. But as far as where we're at, where we're going. So yeah, he knows his stuff, and sometimes it's getting the right people doing the right thing that make things successful.
Agreed.
And I'm not gonna block his path when it comes to the stuff that he knows.
Exactly. Well, Gary, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I am really looking forward to this Kickstarter coming out, so I can see exactly everything that you've been talking about today. And more to the point, I'm looking forward to backing it so I can get a copy of this game to play with my friends. Because, man, like I need another game. Like I need a hole in my head. But this looks great. So this is exactly the kind of narrative game that I want to sit down with my friends to play out, and I want to evolve my own race, and I want to, there's just so many good things. So, guys, if you're listening to this, Gary's Kickstarter goes live on July 12th. That is a Friday. So be ready for it, look for it, and yeah, man, show the guy a little love, because this is something special. It's not like, not all games on Kickstarters have the backing and the love and the play testing behind it to ensure that it's a full gaming experience. This does not feel like a version 1 rule set. This feels like something a lot more. So Gary, I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much. If people want to find out more about this game, do you have a website that people can look at?
We do. They can go to genesysgames.com. And that's a good launching point, because it has information about the Genesys Project, also links to Facebook. And that's probably the best place to go to get that introduction. And we will have more information up on both as well. And we just launched the Facebook page a few weeks ago. I think it's going now, but that will give you more up-to-date information on exactly what's going on almost day to day. I think I even mentioned I was going to be recording with you today.
Oh, nice. There you go.
So it's want to know what's going on a day-to-day basis. Check out Facebook, check out the genesysgames.com, and see us on July 12th.
Now, it is Genesys spelled Genesys. So if you are looking, look for to put that Y in there, and then you will find it.
Correct.
Nice. Well, Gary, as I said, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you today, and I am looking forward to seeing how successful your Kickstarter is. And we wish you all the luck from Cast Dice, and thank you so much for coming on.
And thank you for having me. It's been great, and it's been a lot of fun to talk about the game.
Mate, you are exactly the kind of game designer that we love to talk about. Someone who's passionate about their project and has put, countless hours into it to make sure that the people who are playing their game are having a great time. So thank you again.
And thank you.
All right.
All right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have feedback about this episode of Cast Dice and you have want more information about the Genesys Project or want me to pass anything on to Gary or have feedback about games that you would like us to talk about or just want to talk shop, you can go to Facebook and search up Cast Dice, CASTDICE. My name is Brad, and I am the only one who answers messages to that page. Guys, we have seen a massive upswing in messages to the page in recent months, and I have to say it just comes down to you guys having great ideas for the show and having, great feedback about the things we're doing. I know that I do have guests on every week, but at its core, this gaming podcast really is just me. And so it is wonderful to get encouragement and to hear exactly what you do like so I can make sure that I you get more of it. So without further ado, though, I think it is time to say goodnight. So when you are playing the games that we know and love, I hope your dice roll hot. I hope your beverages are cold. But more than anything else, we at Cast Dice hope that you are having fun. Good night.
Another day rise in Paraguayan sun. A few cracks open, another Heineken. He's all alone. He's in his little room. He's all alone with a Burmese python and a gone, and that track